In all plausibility, since every academic discipline from literature and history to sociology and theology have competing theories or schools of thought, certainly activated my attention to the fact that there is a convention that interfaces with the political and the philosophical functionalism. For example, functionalism, Gestalt psychology, psychoanalysis, behaviorism, humanistic psychology, and cognitivism are deemed schools of thought, are the foundation for those new to the world of psychology. Further, the same also makes up the modern and classical schools of thought, which also occupies space in the world of psychology. These competing theories or schools of thought certainly adds value to the discourse and also activated the contours of my intellect into thinking that there is no one right manner at interpreting a culture. Such reasoning drew my attention to a scene which underscores the fact why some global citizens read a newspaper article about politics and reach different conclusions based on their personal viewpoints and experiences. This example proves the point that in other scenes the same is replicated. For example, understanding and interpretation of the Constitution by the Supreme Court have changed as often as the Chief Justices of the Court. In this frame, it is reported that each Supreme Court Justice, as well as all lower federal judges, have an individual idea of how to interpret the Constitution. This particular difference of ideas and methods allows for any two judges applying the Constitution to the same legal issue to likely reach different conclusions. That being underscored, correspondingly, justices on the Supreme Court have had different interpretations of the clauses in the Constitution. Interpreting is a translational activity in which one produces a first and final translation on the basis of a one-time exposure to an expression in a source language. The most common two modes of interpreting are simultaneous interpreting, which is done at the time of the exposure to the source language, and consecutive interpreting, which is done at breaks to this exposure. In this context, we've observed that although interpreting is an ancient human activity which predates the invention of writing, yet the origins of the profession of interpreting date back to less than a century ago. For the reasons that history is about the making of a country and culture, is also about the making of a global citizen. What is uniquely interesting, interpreting culture behaves somewhat like a double entendre. As you are aware, a double entendre is a literary device that can be defined as a phrase or a figure of speech that might have multiple senses, interpretations, or two different meanings, or which might be understood in two different ways. The Oxford Dictionary is crystal clear as it conveys an indelicate meaning. Conversely, given the functionalism of this theoretical expression, a country lacking in culture really lacks in people that could not be the proud owner of intellectual achievements. In this frame, these lines of reasoning explicitly and implicitly suggest that culture and history are interrelated, because culture is a subset of history. What is also very telling in this conversation, in a way, the same relates to the theory of culture, which has to do with interpreting and translation. These two constructs are closely related linguistic disciplines, yet they are rarely performed by the same people. Importantly, as global citizens, we must be cognizant of the difference in skills, training, aptitude, and even language knowledge, which are so substantial that few people can do both successfully on a professional level. Interpreting is the aesthetics of a culture, which must be taken into account by marketers when styling the product, and its packaging determining the linguistic distance of a culture leads to assessing if a culture which is individualistic and collectivist. This clarification provides space to analyze cultural practitioners trying to quantify the influence media has on the culture by trying to comply with the rituals of a culture during the interpreting process. On the surface, the difference between interpreting and translation is only the difference in the medium. The interpreter translates orally, while a translator interprets written text. Both interpreting and translation presuppose a certain love of language and deep knowledge of more than one language. For instance, knowledge is found directly in conscious experience. How you relate to an experience determines its meaning for you. Language is the vehicle of meaning. To a large extent, what is very telling is the fact that since this activity consists of establishing oral or manual communication between two or more speakers who are not speaking, then we must be cognizant of the fact that global citizens' communication often involves the use of verbal irony or sarcasm, where the speakers usually mean the opposite of what they said. However, history is about making of a country, whereas culture is about making of a man or an individual. History is a chronological record of important events. Culture is a potpourri of art, music, dance, and sculpture. History is all about kings and kingdoms, where culture is all about the development made by man in the field of fine arts. This thinking transcends all global citizens, hence making them complicit and to face the battle of bringing their own personal bias to the text, namely interpreting culture, since it is hard work, especially since we have different doctrinal beliefs. Interpreting culture is seemingly consisting of many different and connected parts. Therefore, it is much better that it is interpreted so as to minimize it being misconstrued. However, in all probability, the more that culture and history is ventilated as a conversation, I have concluded that culture is a subset of history. And in all plausibility, since every academic discipline from literature and history to sociology and theology have competing theories or schools of thought. Further, this concludes this matter involving culture and history. However, beyond a shadow of a doubt, there is no one right way in interpreting culture, for the reason that the viewpoints and the experiences of global citizens can cause them to reach different conclusions.